Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Annette Munich. I'm the co host at Father Shawn's Paranormal Ministry. And unfortunately, again, this week he's not able to be here. He's gone until further notice due to his wife's illness. And we do have a GoFundMe for that. On the GoFundMe, um, people look for Sharon Whittington, and they're having trouble finding that. So the title says Join Sharon's Fight to Beat Cancer. Join Sharon's Fight to Beat Cancer. Father Shawn is a priest with the United States Old Catholic Church. Many of you know him from Eli Roth Presents The Legion of Exorcists, which is on Travel Channel and also is shown on Max and Discovery Plus. Father Shawn is also an author. He wrote God, Ghosts, and the Paranormal Ministry, Volumes 1 and 2. And those are available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. And also, you can get them through the website, and he will send you a signed copy. And his website is ghostbegone-biz. Those ghostbegone-biz. And I am the co-host Annette Munich. I'm the owner of Stellium Books. We have a really great guest today. Really excited about having Mr. Pat Fitzhugh back with us. He's somebody I've interviewed in the past. We were saying in the green room, like they say nowadays, it's been a minute. So we'll have a lot to talk about. But he is one of the most well-known people to speak on the Bell Witch phenomenon. Pat has a book out, The Bell Witch, The Full Account. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about Ghostly Christ from Dixie and everything that he has coming up. He's an author and a speaker. He's been seen on Discovery Channel, Travel Channel, A&E. And I would like to welcome him right now to the show, Pat Fitzhugh. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Annette. Hello, hello, hello. It's definitely been a minute. A decade, 2 decades, I believe.
It might be 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
But, really nice. And the topic is always good and people enjoy it. And you're so well-spoken. So I'd like to start off right away just by asking, before you even wrote the book, how you got involved in this story.
Well, I've always been a fan of the unknown, creepy stories, ever since I can remember. And my mother told me about the Bell Witch when I was really young. And I mean really young, like 5, 6 years old. Sometimes I couldn't sleep at night. She would try to read me bedtime stories, and that wouldn't put me to sleep. So then one night she read me a book, or started reading me a book about the Bell Witch. And I was just so, what's the word? Not perplexed, mesmerized.
Yeah.
Everything I'd heard, especially with such a small and young mind, that I went to sleep pretty easily because I was trying to digest all that in my mind and just wore myself out and went to sleep. But that story came into my mind very early on. My interest grew over time. And then one day, when she explained to me that it involved real people and real places, and she had actually gone to school with some of the descendants of that family.
Oh, wow.
Like, whoa, so you mean this really happened or could have happened?
Oh, wow.
And yeah, she's like, yes, those are real people. Red River is a real place. I grew up just 2 miles from there in Cedar Hill, and on and on. So at that point, there was more of a connection or a personal connection to the story. And then she explained how several generations back, one of our ancestors had married into some of the Bell family. Just a lot of interesting things. So my interest kind of took hold from there.
That's a fascinating story. So your mother was telling you about this, and then you found out that you and your family have personal connections with descendants from this story, and it was all happening in your area, and that's really cool. The Bell Witch story doesn't seem like a great lullaby story to me, but I also like really spooky things, so I get what you're saying. And then also the part where it all shifts when you find out, wait, this is a real story.
Yeah,
Not
absolutely.
only is this a real story, this is a real story that happened in this area, and we know some of these family members.
Yeah, and it was just mind-boggling. And I think the part about it that put me to sleep has to do with the way my mind is wired. I would hear the story, and one paragraph after the other, I would think, "There's no way this could have happened." Oh, wait a minute, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. How did it happen? And my brain would go into analytical mode, what little analytical mode I had at that age, but it just wore me out. A lot of fascination there, a lot of intrigue and everything. And the story grows all the time as well. So there was never a shortage of things to look at. And as I became older, the question became, how much of this did happen? What didn't happen? What is the story behind the story? How did this whole story even come into existence? What happened to make it come into existence? So those questions were the ones that I set out to answer way back when, I think around 1978, which is before most people were even born. But that's when I started the research back then. And I thought it would make for a good little summer project. But here I am, almost 50 years later, and it's like, I might have scratched the surface just a little bit, but
Wow.
it's just, every answer yields 10 to 20 more questions.
Yeah, it's the proverbial rabbit hole.
Oh, yes, definitely. And
Mhm.
in the old folk tales about the Bell Witch appearing different ways to different people, one of the most popular characters that it manifested as was actually a rabbit. So, rabbit hole is a, a pretty good explanation, I guess.
Interesting. Hi, Carl. Hi, everybody. Got people coming in and saying hello.
Yeah, I
Um,
see that. There's a Linda, there's a golden cougar wolf.
and Carl,
So, yeah. Hello, everybody. How you doing? Good to see
so one thing that strikes me about Bell Witch is that it's a poltergeist story. It has poltergeist type activity in it. And then it seemed like people in, I hate to say the paranormal community, I think that implies something that it isn't really because we're all just regular individual people. But people stopped wanting to talk about poltergeist things so much and then came up with all these different theories about poltergeist and that they're not really a haunting and it's tied to the girls. And maybe that's true, but it's kind of hard to prove that it is or isn't. So I thought I would toss that your way and see what you think.
Okay, you'll probably regret it when I finish. You'll regret asking me that. That's one of my favorite sore spots, or excuse me, my favorite topics. Um, okay, first and foremost, there's absolutely poltergeist type activity in the Bell Witch story,
Mhm.
especially in the very early part. As time went on, there was still some poltergeist activity, but there was a lot of other activity that one would not normally attribute to a poltergeist unless it just happens to fit into their personal definition of a poltergeist, which is where I'm headed with this. And I've been in this field an awful long time, done a lot of research, met an awful lot of people, and yada yada yada. And it's funny. I asked 20 people, "What is a poltergeist?" And they'll say, "Oh, that's simple. It's German. It means noisy ghost." Okay. So what are some examples? And from those 10 or 20 different people, you hear 10 or 20 different examples. So I don't think there's a consensus out there anywhere on what exactly constitutes poltergeist activity and what doesn't. I think the only consensus is that it means noisy ghost in German.
Right.
So when I look at the Bell Witch case or any other case involving that type of activity, I go with my own definition of poltergeist, which is based upon things I have read and researched over the years and what I think makes the most sense. And that definition is a ball of malevolent entity, or excuse me, of malevolent energy that is genderless and mindless. It has no gender, it has no mind. It's just a ball of malevolent energy acting with a very strong force. So there you're getting things that go bump in the night, things, china may fall, get knocked off of a shelf, chairs could fall over, a number of things like that could happen. But I see a poltergeist as a ball of energy. Some people think a poltergeist can quote Bible scripture and can talk to people and perform logical reasoning. But who knows? Maybe they're right. But as far as I'm concerned, a poltergeist can't do that. It's a very basic form of energy. Now, when you get down to it, you look at what people have researched over the years and put out there about poltergeist. Um, One interesting thing that several researchers have agreed on is a poltergeist, this energy has an agent. The agent is the person whose brain waves or the waves generated by this person's mind are malformed, which is evoking or bringing into being this malevolent energy coming from the brain. That is the agent. And then there are theories, what causes this to happen? Why does it happen repetitively? We started out with theories like Nander Fodor, the lawyer who turned parapsychologist years ago, Hungarian guy, talking about usually this malformed energy comes from the minds of adolescents or pre-adolescent people who are undergoing or who have underwent serious emotional trauma. Then a little later on, more insight is given when we got people like William Roll and some people, I think, from University of North Carolina, some parapsychologists back in the 1960s came around and said, well, these bouts of poltergeist entity, they recur because this energy is released from the mind at different times, the same energy over and over. And that mind controls this poltergeist force, which in turn causes things to move, people to get hit by an invisible force, and so on. And they called it RSPK, or recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. So then that theory, combined with Dr. Fodor's theory, set forth or laid out the perfect platform to create all different types of Bell Witch theories. But, again, if you're basing your whole expectation or explanation of the Bell Witch on the notion that it was only a poltergeist, I think you're wrong, because there's a lot more going on than just that.
Right. The story gets more complicated than that. But I know that when they started linking poltergeist activity to pubescent or prepubescent females, then it kind of made it seem like this energy was attached to them and it was part of perhaps their thought form. And what worries me is perhaps they're blamed for it. And that, may or may not really be anything of the case. I don't know what to think about all of it. I think that there's okay, I think you can tell me I'm probably wrong. I haven't had a lot of these cases. I think that something like that might be a condition that can heighten the situation. For example, we know that with some very severely haunted places, they share some same qualities, which you don't have to be haunted, but if you do, they can magnify. So maybe the fact of having pubescent age girls magnifies it, but I feel like you're saying that it's something that's not necessarily attached to the girl, that it's an independent thing, that may or may not even have a human origin.
You'll see that, yeah, in a way. I mean, it's undeniable that there was poltergeist type activity as part of that story. But what we don't really know for sure is whether it was attached to the emotions or the subconscious of the young daughter, Betsy, or whether it came from somewhere else. For that matter, we don't know, I mean, we already talked about Dr. Father and then the parapsychology folks up at North Carolina, but we don't know if their theories are any good. All they did was spit out the theories. They didn't put forth the framework that they used to formulate those theories. So we don't even know if that's true. But I mean, that's just something that's been put out there as a theory. But just looking at the definition of a poltergeist, there's lots of poltergeist activity there coming from somewhere. And there are a lot of stories about the Bell Witch, and you will see connections or possible connections to the Native American culture as well.
Interesting. For the people that don't know the Bell Witch story, about what year are we talking about that? That started and it was active.
Yeah, that was the Tennessee version of the Bell Witch was 1817 to 1821. And that's the version most people are familiar with.
Mhm.
Then it returned in 1828 for a brief period, then promised to return in 107 years, which had been 1935. And the stories of its alleged return vary significantly. Some people say it did not return, others say that it did return in 1935 as promised. And then a lot of people say, with everything that's gone on since 1821 up in that area, that it probably never left the place to begin with.
That's possible because it's really hard. I, as a person in the paranormal, I'm not an investigator, but I hear so many stories and I do paranormal books and I've talked to a lot of people. And as we've said before, we've been around for a minute or two. You hear so many different
Yeah.
things. And it's difficult because the way that we learn is we take this case and we compare it to something else that we know, but that doesn't mean it's the same. It's not the same. It's an entirely different thing. So we're trying to understand something that you almost can't put in a box.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. There are a lot of cases, there are a lot of parallels between the Bell Witch and other cases, but each case is separate. And with regards to the Bell Witch, I talked about things outside of the realm of poltergeist activity. This thing began whispering to the people. They couldn't even understand what it said at first. But then over time, as more and more people heard about this and came to the Bell Farm to witness this, or hopefully witness it, it seemed that this thing fed off of their presence and their collective fear, and that whisper grew into a voice. So at that point, we've got a voice talking, and people would ask the thing questions, and it would answer. Sometimes it would answer with Bible scripture. Uh, Other times it would answer a person's question with some event that happened to the person many years earlier that it actually knew about some way.
Yeah, that almost sounds like an entity. But when you were saying tied to Native Americans, I hear some really odd cases connected to Native Americans, curse-wise.
Oh, yeah.
And also, they have a lot of stories that you don't hear so much outside of their community of shape-shifting and different kinds of entities and little people. I'm in Oklahoma right now, and there's quite a bit of these kinds of stories around here. Werewolves, little people, shape-shifting.
There you go.
There's a whole, what I'm trying to say, short story long, is that that opens a window to so many more possibilities of things that we don't really understand. What makes it start, what would make it stop. If something could be lingering around and then it's active again, who knows? Could it be a
Right.
curse?
Yeah, there have been some theories about curses on the Bell family, curses on the land, but with anything with a curse, you always have to ask, is this really a curse? Are there coincidences? The only curse I've heard about, or the one I've heard the most about, is one that says the oldest male in every generation of that line of Bells will die.
Ooh,
So I keep thinking about that, and I didn't have to think long to realize that everybody dies. So yeah, the oldest male will die, the oldest female, the youngest male, we all die.
right.
So I didn't put any stock into that curse at all. Nowadays so many people hear something and it generates a big thrill and they just take it and run with it without even, applying any critical thinking and saying, wait, everybody dies. So yeah, I guess they will. That's a heck of a curse.
Right.
It must be on everybody. But yeah, Native American. Many people have thought this thing was a shapeshifter, and a lot of what people were seeing, these different manifestations, you could roughly call it maybe a shape shifting type entity. I've had Native American people, shaman, come to tell me they thought it was this spirit, a Native American spirit called Trickster. And that spirit is a plays tricks on people, but has a very, very evil intention. And according to the Native American beliefs about this trickster entity, it would have the capability of pulling off a lot of what was reported with the Bellwitch story. Then we have, the portal theory, where the Bells or someone on that land opened up a portal to the other side, and the Native American connection to that is that essentially what happened that we do know about one of John Bell's sons a few years before all the disturbances started. He and a friend went up to one of the corners of a farm and they opened up a Native American grave, hoping to find some, I guess, money or treasure or something to steal. And the theory is that perhaps that grave being opened may have set something off. Um, Also, you have the other story where there was treasure supposedly buried under a rock, and if somebody found that treasure and gave it to Betsy Bell, this thing said it would go away. Then some people say that digging that hole opened up a portal. Then we also have some folks, including a well-known TV show, who claimed that the portal was opened when John Bell and his sons began building the family home. And all I've got to say is I've got the deed, and that home was already on the property long before the Bells even set foot in Tennessee. So that that little theory there is obviously bogus there. But on the other hand, perhaps they were building a building, an outbuilding on the property, and maybe have opened up a portal or something that way.
That's actually very interesting and kind of terrifying. And um, I don't know. again, out here where there's a lot of Oklahoma legend and lore and stories, I tend to want to just leave things like that alone because you don't know what you're opening up. And um, again, saying if you're not even sure what something is, it can be very difficult to figure out what to do about it. We've got Linda saying energy can remain, where energy has occurred, the energy can remain unless God and a priest exorcist intervenes. Um, yes, I would say yes. It would for sure be worth trying. What's difficult is an exorcism will drive away evil, but you can have something that doesn't want you there that's not necessarily evil. So it can be an unfriendly and um, malevolent feeling, haunting, and yet it's not necessarily demonic. Well, the most popular EVP in the world is Get Out.
That's true. But we don't know if the Get Out was some type of demonic entity, a case of evil, or whether it was somebody that just didn't like the shoes you were wearing. Some spirit didn't like the shoes you were wearing and wanted you out of there. I mean, you don't really know. But I think key to a lot of things like situations where John Bell's son and the other guy disturbed the Native American grave, things along that line. The key to things like that, like you say, people just need to leave things alone, or they need to know what to leave alone
Right,
and when to leave alone. Otherwise, they open themselves up for all types of different things, whether it's some type of spiritual uh, grudge and retribution later, or whether it's nothing but everything that happens to them later, they blame on it. Either way, messing with the wrong things at the wrong time, violating some sacred rules, violating the sanctity of certain things, it's just asking for trouble. And we see that a lot nowadays in the paranormal world
right,
because the paradigm, unfortunately, has shifted. What we're seeing now aren't investigators and researchers, we're seeing entertainers.
yes,
Right. And, it's all about doing something that's mind boggling. No matter how many times you have to fake it or whatever, mind boggling, so you can get those all important social media hits, which in
right,
turn boost your ego and make you feel like a better person.
right,
Or if you're lucky, you might get a little bit of money here and there, from some of these social media platforms. So, we have a whole new breed of paranormal investigators out there. As far as the bona fide investigators, the serious ones, I mean, we're all getting old, we're dying out. But, I see a lot of that nowadays, especially in videos out there on YouTube. People get into all kinds of things that they should. They
right,
go out there and start provoking,
right,
trying to open graves, and the list just goes on and on and on.
right,
No wonder these people are running around screaming demon all the time. They did so many
right,
things. Maybe demons are after them.
right. Um, that was difficult for me because sometimes people ask for a referral for a team that could come to their home or building or establishment or whatever it is. And I don't want to recommend somebody that will make it worse. And by making
Exactly.
it worse, that happens a lot. If you get, and I'm not trying to put down a lot of people, I'm just saying there are some, they're there for trying to collect some kind of proof, evidence, and they're not really concerned about the family. And to me, there's a big difference between how you handle a vacant building and a place that somebody has to live in, and they're stuck with whatever you stir up while you're there, and you didn't help them at all. I don't know if everybody comes there with the intention of help.
Oh, oh, I know that's right. I know of plenty of groups that do have that intention, and they honestly want to help people. They consider their job not as like a paranormal sleuth, but as a human helper to help somebody through a situation. Then you've got a lot out there that do it just so they can get some video and put it out there on the internet and try to make a little money off of it, or just put a feather in their cap. We've investigated more homes than anybody else. That kind of thing. A lot of silly stuff goes on nowadays. But yeah, it's all about helping people. If you got a person, they have to live in that home. Maybe they can't move. Could be a lot of reasons they can't move. So they're having to live with this stuff day in and day out. And that fear layers on top of itself over and over. And it's just a heavier and heavier toll. And they need legitimate people to come in. And with so many people nowadays claiming to be paranormal investigators and all of that, I mean, about all you can do is go by word of mouth from reputable people, or recommend people that you've investigated with before and are honest.
Right. But go by reputation. We've got Linda saying a priest exorcist can set boundaries if the spirit weren't malevolent. That's true. And also you can teach the homeowners how to set some boundaries, for sure, and take back control of their home. Also, I think you can consecrate the property and things like that. There's a number of things you can do and try. So yes, boundaries, yes. Depending on what you're dealing with, that's the hard part. What is it? Once you dig into some of these stories, a lot of times you end up having true compassion for what happened there. Usually very sad and tragic. That's why when I see some of these paranormal investigators, especially the young ones that look like they're in it for thrills and kicks, and walking into some place and doing things that are very immature, disrespectful, and sometimes dangerous, and that they don't really understand that. They just think that this is some woohoo time. Let's go and see if anything happens, and I hope it does. Those are some of the videos on YouTube that I run across. If somebody handles it well, then it's interesting. I like the history of the building. I like the story behind it. I think most good paranormal investigators are historians at heart. If you don't have any care or feeling about the place, you're never going to know more than just a slice of the story.
Yeah, very true.
So
people don't want to.
Yeah.
Investigators don't want to know the history. They consider learning the history ahead of time is a form of bias, and they want to go into it with a totally open mind without knowing anything about that location and see what they pick up on. I guess that's okay. I prefer to know the history of a place first, but others look at it the other way.
I would rather know the history first, and then also, it takes a while to make any kind of determination, because you can go somewhere a couple of times, not much happens. And then you can walk in and one day it feels different and quite a bit happens. They don't perform on cue. It's not like that. And, like you were saying, excuse me, with Bell Witch, that something can go dormant. And dormant doesn't mean that it's over necessarily. So that's another part of, the mysterious scenarios that surround all of these different cases, which are all individual, occurrences. So very interesting. But Bell Witch went on for a long time. They ended up making a movie, An American Haunting, and you were connected to that movie, and Donald Sutherland and Sissy Spacek, and I love both of them. I saw that movie. I thought it was very good. Did you feel like they handled the story well, or do you think they jazzed it up a little bit?
Well, the background on that is we go back to the Nandor Fodor theory, the Hungarian lawyer turned parapsychologist or psychiatrist, whatever, and about a poltergeist being an agent, or excuse me, having an agent. And he himself did not even investigate the Bell Witch case, but he allegedly made some comments about it, essentially stating that it was likely a poltergeist, and that was what he liked to investigate, and that more than likely the Betsy Bell girl, who was the youngest daughter, was the agent of the poltergeist, and that there was some type, probably maybe some type of emotional trauma on her part. So then we roll it back into North Carolina, William Rowe, and all that, whereby we're talking about multiple occurrences or multiple attacks and back into the recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. Then, after that, November of 1968, a magazine called Playboy did an article about the Bell Witch. Now, if anybody's familiar with what Playboy was, then obviously they would understand that they would take a what would you call a bedroom type angle to that story. So all they did was took what they had heard about those theories and plugged in some things into variables. So what they decided to come up with was that there was an abusive relationship between father and daughter, and that the trauma that resulted from that, or allegedly resulted from that, fed this poltergeist. And the reason that the girl and her father bore the brunt of all the physical Bell Witch disturbances was because her subconscious mind was having this poltergeist attack her father for punishment, but then also attacking her for punishment, not for doing it, but for not telling anyone about it. So that was the theory that Playboy magazine stuck out there. Well, later on, one of the many, many, many people uh, who've written books about the Bell Witch, I guess, was looking for a theory or something, and they ran across that in the Playboy magazine article. So they based their whole thing around that theory. They did the Bell Witch story around that theory. Much of what was in that movie was not even part of the Bell Witch story. Uh, None of the key parts of it were even mentioned in there. It was just basically trying to put forth that particular theory, or what we call the abuse theory. And I was a very outspoken opponent of the abuse theory long before that movie, or even the book that led to the movie even came about, and still am. So when I was approached about the movie work and doing scenes on the DVDs and this, that, and the other, I'm like, hey, you're using probably the worst and most illogical theory that's ever been put forth. Your theory is a complete total joke, and it's a shame, the bad light it casts on the Bell family. So, by the way, do me a favor, don't you ever try to call me again. Well, of course, that didn't do any good. They just kept calling, please, please, please. And I kept saying, no, 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 forget it, and some other words. And eventually, they came up with a deal that would work out. And that was where they would put me on there, and I would get to share my thoughts about the case in general. So at that point, I'm like, yeah, if I get to speak my own mind and my own thoughts, I'll be on your show. Sure. So that's how I became involved in that. Was they shot several interviews that later went into special features, which appeared on the DVD, and I was in those. Of course, the parts where I talked about how silly that theory was, of course, were cut out of it. But like the director had told someone else, he just wanted me in the show because I was a Bell Witch researcher. He had to have me there. So, but I
Yeah,
believe I didn't support their theory.
you just being there legitimizes the whole thing, whether they show everything that you said or not.
I think that's probably what they were shooting for, what they were after. And, I didn't mind, as long as I got to speak my own thoughts.
Right.
And that's no different from any other TV, film, documentary, or any other work I do. I don't speak from a script. I do my own speaking, my own thinking, and all that. Otherwise, I just won't become involved.
Right. And that's what happens with a lot of things that become Hollywoodized,
Oh,
and you run into it with different stories and different people, and they go and do the tour, talking about what really happened as opposed to the movie or TV, or even sometimes someone writes a book. But usually it's movie or TV where they inject a whole bunch of stuff into it because they just want viewership and sell tickets. And a lot of the people that I knew that were involved with TV projects, a lot of the times the cameramen and stuff, they don't even believe in this stuff.
right.
Occasionally they get converted, but um, it's about sponsors, and it's
Yeah,
about tickets for movies, and they jazz it up and do what they have to do. And then in the
exactly.
beginning of the movie, it says based on real events, which is not really a lie, but people read that and think this whole thing is true.
You're right. They don't stop and think based on
Right,
that phrase. Based on is very important. And another thing with American Haunting, what I also made them do as a condition of my participation was put a disclaimer out there. I can't remember if they put it at the beginning or ending of the movie, but they did put it out there saying the story, there's many different conclusions of what might have happened, and that this is only one of them.
right,
Yeah, so that was good too. But yeah, with the whole TV thing, it is what it is. The movie business, the TV business, all of that stays in business by sponsors, advertisements, people buying advertising space. The more viewers they have, the better ratings and everything. Ratings and viewers means they can charge more money for from the sponsors.
right,
That's what it's about. So they're going to have to put only the things out there that are going to get and hopefully retain the most viewers.
right,
We're talking numbers, not quality necessarily, but viewer numbers, because then they could go to these sponsors and say, well, look at these ratings and such statistics, such and such viewers. We will sell you this 10-second advertisement space for the bargain of 15 million or whatever. That's how they make their money.
right,
So that's how they do that. And sensationalism is a big thing and all
right,
that. What is sensational? What are going to people going to be glued to the screen week after week
right,
just to watch somebody say, okay, well, this is not haunted. I didn't detect anything here. People aren't going to do that. They want to see these young kids running out of these houses and places, screaming demon here, demon there. Oh my God, this something grabbed me in the throat. You
right,
know, the masses look at paranormal as nothing but entertainment. They
right,
don't care. They don't care whether it's true or not. It's entertainment to them, and it's money to the industry.
right,
And, by comparison, only a small niche of people, also known as the paranormal community, take it serious and are more interested in evidence gathering and analysis, the critical thinking, separating the explainable from the unexplainable, and so on and so forth.
Right.
We seem like a huge community, but we're really not when you look at it with the masses. We're a very small subsection of that.
Right. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying all of the TV shows are fake. And I'm not saying that. Or the same thing with the movies. I'm just saying that it gets into the hands of people that are not that really interested in what the actual story may or may not be. And
There's some good shows out there
yes, there are some good
that,
shows there.
they're not all about the fakery, BS, and all that. I think one of the very first ones out there, which was really serious and did more good than harm, was Ghost Hunters.
I
Taps.
was just going to say Ghost Hunters. And you know what? A really good thing that came out of Ghost Hunters is that before that time, a lot of people that had paranormal problems didn't talk about it. And after Ghost Hunters came out, because they were kind of the first, then people started feeling more and more apt to say that they've experienced some of these things because there was a time, of course, again, I've been around for a while that you didn't always talk about this stuff in mixed company. There would always be someone that would want to laugh at you or say that you are just trying to get attention or something like that. And I do think that there's a high likelihood that there are people that were in old mental institutions that actually have paranormal problems, and people decided they were crazy, that they were seeing and hearing things and whatnot. So that made it when um, Taps came out, Ghost Hunters, and then other shows after that, that made people a lot more open about their experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It allowed people to come forward, and we're not so much afraid to talk about it. They realized that other people were having experiences similar to their own. And, that just holding it in and continuing to keep it silent is not going to resolve anything.
Right.
That's good. And another good one, show like Expedition Unknown. I
I
think,
love that show,
yeah,
Expedition Unknown.
absolutely. And one of the people who's on there, Heather, uh, she has, I don't know if she's going to do it next year or not. I assume she is, but she's always the host of the Paranormal Expo there in Arkansas that I've done just about every year. Totally wonderful folks out there. They have me back every year. Arkansas Paranormal Expo in October, and she is part of that. And in fact, her mother is the, I guess she would call it the director or executive director, whatever you want to call it, of that. And they have their own, the paranormal team as well. So yeah, the that expedition show, she was on there as of a couple of years ago, I believe is when she came on. But yeah, that's another
Interesting.
good one too.
Yeah, very interesting. I like that one too. Really interesting stories too, because real paranormal, um, a lot of stories are very creepy on their own and they don't need adding to it. Uh, People really do enjoy a good story, a good investigation, all of that, and the old movies um, that they're spooky. Nobody has to get, chopped up or
Right.
something. They're just good, solid stories that are creepy and spooky, and people enjoy that. Same thing with books. I think they've taken, I guess I'm going to say, unfortunately, people are kind of desensitized and they like to make things a lot more. I don't like when things get gory that don't have to be gory. I don't
Yeah,
like,
that's more to me. That's more horror
right,
than paranormal.
right. Yeah, me too. One of the scariest movies I remember was the movie A Haunting that was made back in the 60s. I don't know if you ever saw that one with experiment, the paranormal experiment that they were doing at the old mansion. And again, just the the sound and the story itself carried it without anything being.
I'm pretty sure I did see that at some point.
I'm trying to think of.
I think it was considered an old movie by the time I saw it. But seems like
Yeah,
I remember a paranormal experiment, and this was going on like in, I think they did it in like the mid to late 1960s was when it
yes,
originally started.
yes. I'm trying to think of the name of the lady that starred in it. Um, but it was a very well done movie and very creepy in its own right. Very, very. And that's kind of like it was a black and white movie. And of course, but
I love
very,
all black and white movies. I
me
grew up
too.
on those,
Me
especially
too. I love that.
those old British horror movies.
Yes,
Wonderful stuff.
absolutely. Um, Before we go, maybe we should talk about your books. And everything that you have is available on Amazon.
That's correct.
Do
Everything
you have?
that's in print that I've kept in print. It is available on Amazon, other online retailers. There are also some books and bricks and mortar
Right,
retailers that carry them as well, more so, especially around Halloween time. So
right,
those books are out there, and you can order signed copies from the actual website,
right.
uh, patfitzhugh.com.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have those out there. There's the Bell Witch book, and also Ghostly Cries from Dixie, which is a collection of ghostly tales and weird tales from around the American Southeast.
Oh, yes, because you specialize mostly in the southern part of the country.
Uh, I've done a lot of research there. I don't know if I'd call it specialized, but I'm probably best known for that.
Yeah.
I do
And
other
you,
things as well.
you have a book that talks about some New Orleans hauntings.
Yes, the book Ghostly Cries from Dixie. There are two New Orleans stories there. One is more of a history story, history lesson about Marie Laveau. I'm sure you've heard of her, the Voodoo Queen.
Yes.
We talk about her early history, her early first husband who died, her rise to prominence in the voodoo community, her becoming friends with people at the upper crux of New Orleans society at the time. Uh, on and on. A lot of things about Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen, essentially to try, if anything, just clear her name. Because let's face it, history has not been good to Marie Laveau at all.
Oh no, she's painted as like the number one voodoo queen of all voodoo queens.
Well, she's painted as an evil
Right,
voodoo queen.
right.
And, what I found out about her, she led a very respectable life. She was a hairdresser, which I guess probably put her in a position to hear a lot of gossip. But, you know, I mean, she was a member the Catholic Church there. She was on their benevolence committee that would help look after and take care of people who were unable to take care of themselves. She was a frequent volunteer at the charity hospital there in New Orleans, helping people who were sick.
Aw,
And her list of good deeds just goes on and on and on. Now, yes, she was a practitioner of voodoo. But if you dig really deep, you'll find that there are connections to voodoo and Catholicism. I mean, they're different things, but there are some underlying connections between those two religions. And not everything voodoo is or was evil, even though I think the general consensus out there in public is that, if it's voodoo, it's evil. These people are putting hexes on people and killing them, and so on and so forth. Well, you know, like I say, those folks need to do some studying. So, at any rate, she was a voodoo queen by about 1831. there were over 15 women, young women in New Orleans, who were trying to be the head voodoo lady, the voodoo queen. And I'm sorry, but Marie outshined them all. And she became the undisputed voodoo queen. It made those other women very jealous, made them very mad. No telling what kind of evil rumors got started about her because of that. And, interestingly enough, after that, Marie had a daughter who herself became a voodoo queen. They called her Marie Laveau number two. And she did some of the same charity type stuff that Marie Laveau Sr. Did. Anyway, very interesting story. Also, in Ghostly Clash from Dixie, have you heard about the Lalaurie Mansion?
The what?
Lalaurie,
No.
spelled Lalaurie Mansion in New Orleans. It's on the Royal
Oh,
Street.
no. Oh, you know what? Is that sometimes people call that the Lalaurie?
I've heard it pronounced Lalaurie. I've heard it
Okay.
Lalaurie.
Okay. So I know what you're talking about, but I didn't know it like the more of a Creole.
Yeah, that story has to do with Madame Lalaurie and her husband Leonard, who was a prominent surgeon. They were very big socialites in New Orleans back in the late 20s, or excuse me, yeah, late 1820s, early 1830s. Her first tie to prominence was that her cousin had been mayor of New Orleans from 1815 to 1820. And in 1831, she and her husband bought this mansion there on Royal Street in New Orleans. And they had several enslaved people who worked for them there. Ironically enough, the woman's parents, who were wealthy plantation owners, had been killed years earlier at a slave revolt on the island of Haiti. So maybe that had something to do with a very strong aversion to slavery, or not slavery, but to the slaves, to the enslaved people on her part. But when she would call these people, the slave people at her house, to come get her something or do this, that, and the other, it's like they would go into terror. They would just be scared to death if she would call their names or ask them a question. They would start shaking. They would be so afraid. And
Wow.
even visitors, other wealthy, prominent people noticed this because that just wasn't something that usually happened. But these slaves were scared to death of her. A lot happened. Very strange things happened. Um, Very suspicious things, I might add. Up until the point in 1834, when one of the cooks there at the house, who was enslaved, decided to start a fire. Hopefully, get some people in there and draw attention to what was happening. Looks like we're almost out of time. So, to make a long story short, she and her husband had been tying the slave people up in the attic, cutting them open, doing very grotesque
Oh,
medical
Lord.
experiments, and some of them, of the slaves up there, had died. Others were on the brink of death because they were in such horrible condition. Of course, her husband, the doctor, was a surgeon. So anyway, that was a horrible thing. It was documented in a newspaper at the time in New Orleans called the Daily Bee. A lot of information about that. And we don't have time to go through all the paranormal activity that's happened at that house since then, but it has been a hotbed. But it is a privately owned place, so it's not like we can all go in there.
I heard that, I could be wrong. It could be the wrong place, but I heard Nicolas Cage bought it and owned it for a while, if we're talking about the same place. And
Yes.
yeah, that is really a big story. So much happened there, very prominent. So I've just had the pronunciation off, but I do want to thank you, and I want to thank all of our listeners. And check out Pat Fitzhugh, check out his books, check out his webpage. Hopefully, we could get him to come back on and we could talk more about some of the stuff we dug into today. Next week, I have Samuel Chang coming back to talk about ancient healing and ancient wisdom. and we always really enjoy him. Our big thanks to Joe Montaldo, Michelle DeRoche, everybody at UPRN Talk Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans, 105.3 Gulf Coast. And please stay tuned for Spirit Switchboard with Carolyn Shellhorn. And please also remember prayers and donations for Father Shawn's wife, Sharon. God bless everybody. I'm going to put the link in the show on YouTube for people that watch it later or circle back around and see it on YouTube. If you can give something, you're so appreciated. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Pat. Great to see you again. Thank you so much.
Great. You too. My pleasure.
Thank you.